They're freezing in Florida.
Are you on vacation or do you have a
American coffee. So good morning, everybody. Today, we're going to, like I mentioned, do a double header. We're going to talk about the Torah portion, which is the exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt, from Mitzrayim. And then we're going to talk about a very auspicious day, which is this coming Shabbat, Shabbos, Yud Shvat, the 10th day of Shvat. And I'll explain what that is when we get to it. So
Freida, your face is dark because you're not facing the light.
Okay, let's get it lighter. Hold on. Let's see.
Yeah.
How about now? Any better? Let's move me around. Let's move me around.
There you are. Oh, beautiful.
Let's move this. Okay, Lama, hold on. I got to put it in a different place.
Does everybody agree? Also you, Jane? Or no?
No, I'm gonna leave it that way though. That's
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so you know what?
I have my laundry room. I know I can see that. You look great, everybody.
So in this week's Torah portion, we start with the Exodus, the final moments when the Jewish people finally get to leave Egypt. And of course, the whole Pesach celebration is all based on what happens as the Jews leave and so on. So I'm going to share a little bit of the Torah portion, not all of it today, because again, I wanted to talk about Yud Shvat. And there's two very fascinating topics in this week's Torah portion I want to address. First is the opening passage, Bo. Who knows what Bo means? B-O or Beis Aleph. So Vayayim Hashem el Moshe, By el Parai. God, Hashem says to Moses, come to Paro. Come to Paro. Again, come to Paro. And the terminology is very strange here. When you want to tell someone to go to somebody, you say, go to Paro, right? Go to your mother, go to the store, go to the office. You don't say, come to the office. So Rashi jumps in and says, what God is saying to Moses, because he saw Moshe had a tremendous fear of going to Paro, he says to Moshe, come with me to Paro. Don't think you're going to have to go to Paro by yourself. You're coming with me. So Bo el Paro means come with me to Paro, to the final moments when the last few plagues will come and he will finally release the Jewish people from bondage. And I will harden his heart, says God. And that now poses even a more complicated question. If God hardens his heart, where's free choice? Then you can't blame Paro for not letting the Jewish people go, right? You can't say, let my people go, but I'm going to make you stubborn and obstinate. But the commentaries jump in and say, doesn't mean he hardened his heart. He strengthened his heart. Because by giving Paro the 10 plagues, he's really not giving him free choice. Which king will not release his slaves if you put 10 plagues upon him? You under duress, you let your people go. You let the Jewish people go. So God strengthened Paro so no one should later say, of course he let the Jewish people go. You gave 10 plagues. Of course, which king wouldn't let the slaves go? So he gave him strength to withstand the plagues so that when he let them go, it was indeed of his own free will. It's kind of counterintuitive, but the Kabbalah explains it in this way. And more than that, God, why did God need 10 plagues? So last week we discussed because you can take a slave out of slavery, but you can't take slavery out of the person. They had to see every aspect of the world touched by God to truly know and feel that God is the ruler of every aspect of life. But on another level, God wanted to show the world that God is the leader of the world. This was not only to show Paro, this was to show everyone in the world, look, who rules the world? You think Paro? No, I am the ruler. So God used the 10 plagues to illustrate to the world that God runs the world, not Paro, not the leaders, not the dictators, not the communists, the socialists, and so on. It is God who rules the universe. So going back, is that clear? Anybody have any questions? Going back, first of all, let me ask you a question now. Every plague lasted a month. So tell me, every month Moses went to Paro. Suddenly he's afraid. What happened that now Moses is afraid? He wasn't afraid the other times when he says, let my people go. And Paro says, no, thank you. Oh, yes, I will stop the plague. And then Moshe says, well, let them go. No, I changed my mind. Plague number 2, let my people go. Okay, stop the plague. Okay, no, I changed my mind. The whole time there's a very diplomatic conversation. Moses goes, says, let my people go. He says, only if you stop the plague. Stops the plague. He says, no, I changed my mind. Now he's going back after the plague of darkness. Why is he suddenly afraid? Asks the Torah. Why? What's the fear? All along he wasn't afraid. Also, the first time you're afraid, the second time you're afraid, then you begin to lose your fear. So why suddenly is there an emphasis that God says, Moshe, you're so afraid, but don't worry, I'll be with you? Anybody have an insight or a thought? It's actually a question from the Zohar. The Zohar is Kabbalah. The Kabbalah says, what was this fear? So I want to explain something that's a very, very phenomenal insight, that we look at everything from the external. We see the story, we see a Moshe going to the king saying, let my people go. The king says yes, then he says no. And we think that's the story. But the Kabbalah explains that there's also a supra-natural thing happening behind the scenes in the spiritual realm. The fight, the debate between Paro and Moshe, between Paro and God, is not only an external argument, I don't believe that you're the God, I'm the God. It's also a supra-rational, behind the scenes, otherworldly argument and fight and debate and conflict going on here. That in the realm that's deep, deep in the other worlds, Paro, who's described as a serpent, is fighting the spiritual holy world. And all the other 5 plagues brought Moses closer and closer to conquering that serpent, conquering that evil, conquering that negative energy in the super-rational world beyond what we see in the external. Now, Moshe knows this next encounter is going to be an actual encounter with the serpent, with the evil. The evil has been revealed. Now he's going to come face to face with Paro, symbolic of the negative, terrible energy in the universe. And that's why he's afraid. Because it's the final moment. So let me give you an illustration. An army is fighting a war from a hilltop. They're not close to the enemy. They're fighting from a distance with cannons, with tanks. But what happens when it's hand-to-hand combat? It's much more frightening because you're face to face with the enemy. So you feel a tremendous fear. I'm not shooting from an airplane. I'm not shooting from a tank. I'm going to have to come face to face with the enemy now. Hi, Rochelle. Good morning. Boker Tov. And this is what Moshe is encountering now. Hand-to-hand combat with Paro. Let my people go. So the fear of coming face to face with the serpent, with the Paro, is what causes the fear in Moshe. But God says to him, don't worry, I'm gonna be with you. I'm gonna come with you. And of course, God accompanies Moshe, and Paro says no, and then he says yes, and then finally, after the plague of the firstborn, he actually chases them out. Go. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because everybody in life, we come to points of fear where we fear encounters, we fear things in our life, we have obstacles in our lives. And the approach has to be that you always have to know that Boy El Parai, God is going with you to the obstacles. God is with you during your challenges. You're not alone. You're not alone. He was a very, very wise man. They asked him, I'm going to get how do you always make such good judgment calls? How do you always survive? And he says, good judgment comes from a lot of bad experiences, he says. And he tells the following story that a man was traveling with his donkey, and they came upon a huge crater, and the donkey falls into the crater. Now there's no tow trucks, there's no help to be found, and the poor donkey is braying and crying. And the man says, there's only one choice. I have to bury the donkey alive because I can't get him out, and he's going to die in there. For days it's going to take. So he begins shoveling dirt and rocks into the pit, into the crater. And guess what? The donkey starts jumping on the piles that he's shoveling in until the donkey has so much gravel and sand that he's actually able to jump out of the pit. So sometimes crisis brings solutions. And this is what God's saying to Moshe. I'm going to go with you to Paro. You're not in this alone. You think that you're coming to encountering a giant hole, a giant crater, a giant challenge, giant obstacle. You'll never be able to fight the serpent, so to speak, but I'm with you. So crisis brings opportunity. Boy El Parai is for every one of us. Sometimes you feel you're all alone. Who's holding my hand? Who's helping me? God. You just have to look and acknowledge and say, you know what? I'm not in this alone. We all have the Boy El Parai. God is helping us every step of the way. And actually, the last time Moshe sees Paro, the measure says something no one knows. He slaps Paro across the face before he leaves. Why? He's, Paro, I'll never see your face again, Paro, after this. Because you know why? Till now, you got a chance. You could have been redeemed. You could have been redeemed. You had so many opportunities to acknowledge that there's one God and you have to let his people go, but you didn't. And he slaps him, not because our Moses had anger management, or didn't know how to control himself. But once you punch someone in the face, it shows that there's no hope. The face represents the most crucial part of a person. When you get a slap, it's very demeaning. It's horrifying. Moshe is telling Paro the slap symbolizes that it's all over for you. You had your chance and now there's no coming back. And he leaves. And then we know what happens. It's the plague of the firstborn, and Moshe gathers the Jewish people and he tells them three fascinating things, three beautiful things. And I'm going to read it to you. Let's get the page. So Moshe says to them, a second, Chaf Dalet, Chaf Hey, hold on. Okay, so I pulled out the cake and let's see, Chaf Dalet. Give me, sorry, just finding the place. Thought I had it here, right? So Moshe tells them three things, okay? He says, get ready, we're leaving the land of Egypt. And Moshe says, and it will be, three things are going to happen in the future. We're going to go into the land of Israel. We're going to leave Egypt. We're going to go into the land of Israel. And you will have children. And they heard the good news that they're leaving Egypt, they're going to the land of Israel, and they're going to have children. And they bowed before Moses and God. They all like crouched down in joy. And Rashi jumps in and asks a very interesting question. That they're leaving the land of Egypt, exciting news. That they're going to inherit the land of Israel, also exciting news. But that they're going to have children? Over 1 million Jews left Egypt. Hundreds of children, thousands of children. They all had children. So why were they excited on the news that they're going to have children? Of course they're going to have children. What do they think? When you have 1 million people, you're bound to have children and more children and more children, right? So Rashi asks a very powerful question. Why did they get all excited about the prospect? Vahaya, you're going to have children. And the Hasidus, Jewish mysticism, explains something very powerful. Moshe is saying, Vahaya, and it will be in the future that you will have children. And the word Vahaya is used in the Torah when it's good tidings. And it will be is a symbol of happy occasions to come. Like you think to yourself, oh my gosh, and there will be a wedding. There will be a bar mitzvah. There will be an 80th birthday party. Vahaya, there's going to be in the future. And you're thinking, wow, that's amazing. Unlike the word Vayihi, B'mei Achashverosh, who remembers the Purim story? It opens up with the word Vayihi, and there was a king Achashverosh, and that word, same word, is used for negative tidings, negative events. The whole story of Purim unfolds, but starts with a negative story, how Achashverosh and Haman and so on. Vahaya, says the Torah, is a positive, happy occasions. There's going to be good news. You're going to have children. And from this passage, we learn about the 4 children in the Haggadah. Remember? The 4 children, the Rasha, the Chacham, the wise one, Tom, the simple one, and the She'ena Yedei Elishal, the one that doesn't know how to ask questions. Now the plot thickens. That this particular line that Moshe says, Vahaya, you're going to have children, this line, which is repeated 4 different times in the next Torah portion, that's how we get the 4 children from the 4 passages, refers to the Rasha, the son that's the negative child. When Moshe says to the Jewish people, guess what, guys? Good news. You're not only going to leave the land of Egypt, I'm not only going to take you to Israel, to the land of Israel. Guess what? You're going to have children, Vahaya. But what kind of children? It's going to be Barasha, the child that says at the Seder table and metaphorically through life, do me a favor, mom and dad. What is this in it for me? Why are we even bothering to sit here? Why are we at the Seder table? Why did God, what does it have to do with me that you got taken out of Egypt? Moshe is referring to the contrary child here. When the Jews hear this, they bow in joy. Now, let me ask you a question. If somebody says to you, guess what, guys? In the future, you're going to have children, but guess what kind of children? The contrary ones. Why are you bowing in joy? You say, oy vey. I need therapy already for that type of child. I don't know what's going to be. I'm not going to have the child. I'm going to hold back. No more children. We're done. Somebody tells you. Why did they bow in joy? This is a fascinating Hasidic discourse of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Everybody share. I need your input.
Well, maybe they don't know what's going to happen to them, so maybe they think they're going to die. Well, if they have children, they can't die.
Right, so the prospect of having children, yes. Jane, what did you want to say?
I think if they say they're going to have contrary children, that means the children won't know from slavery. So they're going to already be moving forward and have freedom, and they're going to be living in Israel and starting a new life.
Beautiful, beautiful insight. Anybody, Celia, you want to add something? But you have to unmute if you want to add.
I'm just thinking, like, are they going to be tougher? Are they going to be, like, I ain't taking your crap. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. That's like what came to my mind first, even though I'm sure it's not the right thing, but. You're breaking up.
One of the women gave an answer, and it was actually in a commentary. So I don't know every answer. I'm sharing what I studied. So, but you're all really on the right track, because what God is telling the Jewish people actually, and what Moshe is telling them, that even when you're going to have a child that's going to question and say, what's in it? Why are we sitting at the Seder table? Give me a break here, mom and dad. It happened 3,000 years ago. What's in it for me? Right? But what is actually Moshe's telling them is, yeah, you're going to have at times a contrary child. And guess what? That child will always be part of your people, will always be part of you no matter what happens. There will never be a disconnect. Even though externally there might seem like a disconnect, there will always be a deep, deep connect. Yes.
So also, I was just thinking maybe that child will keep you on your toes.
Exactly. By the way, it's interesting that when you have the apathetic child at times, a child, by the way, also means an adult, because the 4 children in the Haggadah are not only children in age, it's also child that we're all children of God. And when you go down, as Freud said, back to your deep, deep, the id, we're all children deep inside. The purity of the soul, if you go back and uncover and go back to the way it was before we became jaded and targeted and confrontational and influenced, that pureness is the pureness of a child in each and every one of us. More about that in the future. So basically, what Moshe is telling that, yes, you may have children that are contrary, but it's going to, Bahaya, it's going to be good because you know now that even in the year 2021, you will look at Jewish children that don't look like us that left Egypt. They will be maybe even assimilated into American society, disconnected seemingly from God and us and the people. But really, on the deepest level, they're always going to be part of God, part of you, part of the Jewish people, whether they acknowledge it at that moment or not. And basically, also what I was saying is when you have an apathetic child who doesn't care, it's harder to stimulate and inspire. It's usually the students who argue, who debate, who deep down care. That's why they're like that. That's why they'll say, why am I at the Shabbos table? What's in it for me? What is this baloney? Just because you like religion, I have to like religion. Just because mom and pop grew up Jewish, you want me to grow up Jewish? You rather have a child that debates you and has a little excitement and energy, even if it's not exactly what you want to hear, than a child that says, I don't care, whatever you say. But even a deeper understanding is a story I want to share that explains who is Moshe talking about. There's a very beautiful story of the Baba of a Rebbe had a yeshiva in Europe before the Nazis came, and a disciple, one of his disciples comes to him and says, Rebbe, I have a son who doesn't want to be in yeshiva. You know what yeshiva is, intense Jewish education. He doesn't want to be in yeshiva. All he cares about all day is sports and skiing and games. The Baba Rebbe says to the father, let me think about it. He calls in his top student, Tzvi Hirsch, and he tells his student, I need a favor from you, Tzvi Hirsch. I want you to go and learn how to ski. He says, what? Ski? I have no interest in skiing. I like to study. He says, no, I want you to learn how to ski. Take time every day and learn how to ski. His Rebbe, his teacher, his rabbi tells him to learn how to ski. He's going to learn how to ski. So this big scholarly student goes out every day on the ski slopes, and he becomes a black diamond skier, as they call it, a professional skier. Why? His Rebbe said he has to learn how to ski. They live by the Carpathian Mountains area. So he learns how to ski. A few months later, the father calls, the Rebbe, Baba the Rebbe calls back the father. He says, I have an idea. Send your son to school, to me. He sends his son to school, and he sits down with him. He says, what are your interests? I love to ski. I love sports. He says, very good. He calls in Tzvi Hirsch, his top student, privately, and he says, I need a favor from you. Every day, I want you to take this young boy that just came to yeshiva and go teach him how to ski. And while you're on the ski slopes, and while you're going back and forth from the ski slopes, teach him a little Torah. Say a little prayer with him. Have a positive influence on him. And that's what he did. Tzvi Hirsch, this professional skier, but also the big scholar of the school, would take the kid, that teenager, every day on the slopes, and they would study and they would learn and they would pray. And the father came to check up on his son. He says, no, how do you like it? Like it? I love it here. I can't believe it. I'm learning how to ski. And guess what? The lessons are pretty interesting too. And the prayers are pretty good. And this young man who was disenchanted with Judaism became one of the best students in the yeshiva. This is who Moses is talking about. There'll be a time in 2020, you'll have a kid who grew up maybe in a very religious family, and he says, Mom, Dad, I'm not interested in this. This is not for me. What does a father do? Does a father kick him out of the house? God forbid. You go. You teach him how to ski. You show him love and compassion and understanding. This is what the Bobova Rebbe knew about the kids. He knew how to approach every student. Of course, you get a student, you have a child, like I look at my 11. There's one kid, when was the last time I heard from the principal? When I got a call that she's valedictorian. 11 years she's in school, never a phone call, never a complaint, straight A's. And then I have another student kid every day, the principal calls and the teacher calls. You have many different types of children. There's the ones that are like the perfect kids. They surf through life and you say, wow, what a nachas. And then you have the kid that struggles. They don't get straight A's. They're not the scholars. They're not the easygoing ones. And this is what Moses is talking about. You can have a child, v'haya. That's why the Jewish people bowed, because they saw that even when you're going to have a child that seems disconnected, they'll never be disconnected, because Moses promised them, you're going to get the land of Israel. You're going to be exiled from slavery, and you're going to have children. And they might be the Russia, the contrary one, but they're going to be your child and my child and God's child. This is what the Torah is telling us. A footnote to the story. So the Nazis came, and of course, they put all the Jews in a ghetto of this Bobova yeshiva, and Tzvi Hirsch also. And they used to play a game on the days that they were like having a fun day, the Nazis. They would take the yeshiva boys, they would take them to one of the mountains, and they would push them off the mountain. Some survived, some didn't. So they rounded up one day Tzvi Hirsch, this guy, the big scholar and the skier, and they pushed him off. But because he knew how to ski so well, he maneuvered himself without skis down this huge mountain. And he survived and survived to tell the story. That's how we have the story of how he taught the kid. He says when his Rebbe told him to ski, he writes, he couldn't believe it. Like, my talents are wasted on the ski slopes. I'm a scholar. But he said, you never know the plan God has for you and what puts in place also your salvation, your rescue. By knowing how to ski, I survived. He said, I maneuvered with my feet. I was able to survive the slopes. Vahaya, there will be a time, and this is our time now. And soon I'm going to go a little bit more into the approach of how you deal with people and what is this all about? You know? So the Jewish people leave Mitzrayim, and next week's Torah portion, we see what happens. Do you think Paro gives up? The serpent goes after them. The serpent goes after them. So I want to stop now with the Torah portion because I feel that there's such a powerful, interesting thing I want to share about this coming Shabbat, which is the 10th day of Shabbat. So with your permission, I'm going to switch topics. Is that okay? And does anybody have any question or anything before we move on to the next topic?
An obvious question, but why do we have Passover in the spring when we discuss it in the Torah now?
Very well said. Okay, because and by the way, that's why we have a Jewish leap year at times, because it says in the Torah, Chag HaAviv, the holiday of the spring, Pesach must be in the spring. Okay. Now, the holiday of Pesach coincides with the Jewish dates of when we were actually freed from Egypt, and when we brought the sacrifice and everything in Egypt. So the holiday coincides with the Jewish dates. The Torah portion doesn't necessarily coincide with the Jewish dates, okay? Because ein mukdam u'mucha b'Torah. It's not necessarily in chronological order always. So thus, the reading of the Torah may not coincide with when we celebrate the holiday. When do we celebrate the holiday? Following the Jewish calendar, God said on the 15th day of Nisan, you sit down at the Seder, you eat the Karban Pesach. Now we don't have the Paschal sacrifice, the Paschal offering, so that's why we have the egg and the lamb shank bone on our Seder plate. Clear? Yeah, so that's the story. Okay, and we're going to do more about Passover also when we get closer to Passover. But this coming week, actually, we have two holidays. A Hasidic holiday, which is Shabbat, and then on, I think Wednesday is Tu B'Shvat, Jewish Arbor Day, right? The birthday of the trees, Chag LaIlanot. But I want to first talk, I wasn't planning to talk about Tu B'Shvat, but I wanted to tell you that on Wednesday, which is the 15th day of Shvat, what is the custom? The custom is you buy the 7 fruits of the land of Israel, and you make a blessing, and you make a shechiyanu on one of the new fruits that you haven't eaten, and that's how you celebrate Tu B'Shvat. So there's wheat, barley, pomegranate, olives, grapes, figs and dates. So you go to Whole Foods, you buy one of these fruits, some of them, all of them, take one that you haven't eaten before in the past few months, make a blessing, Borei Pri Ha'etz, and the blessing of Shehachiyanu, which is on a new fruit. And you know, many times you make Shehachiyanu on by holidays when you light the Shabbos candles, when you make Kiddush during holidays and so on. Shehachiyanu is the blessing that you make on something new, something fresh. Okay, more about Tu B'Shvat if we have time. Yud Shvat is a very, very interesting day, the 10th day of Shvat. It is the day that 71 years ago, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, passed away, and his son-in-law married to Chaya Mushka, the daughter of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, in 1950, assumed the leadership of Chabad Lubavitch, took over his father-in-law's position as the Rebbe, Jewish leader. And I'm not going to say the Rebbe of only Chabad, but the Rebbe, I feel, of the whole world. And I want to explain a little bit about the Rebbe. Why? You might say, well, I'm not a Chabad student. I'm not a Chassid. I'm not an ultra-Orthodox. I'm not one of them. Why would I need to know about the Rebbe? And the reason is because what the Rebbe's leadership gave to us and of influence gave to us today and continues to give to us is something that I believe after our discussion will resonate and inspire each and every one of us. Not only to say, oh yeah, the Rebbe was so great, wow. That you, each and every one of us can be a leader and an influencer of what the Rebbe put in place 71 years ago when he assumed the leadership of Chabad Lubavitch, continuing the work of his father-in-law and the previous 6 Rebbes. The Rebbe was number 7. That's why I want to discuss the Rebbe, not only because I want to discuss a history story of a great leader, of a great person. You go, wow. And one thing as a woman, I want to tell you, the Rebbe did not want to take over the leadership of his father-in-law. The Rebbe was an introvert, quiet scholar. His wife, Chaya Mushka, said to her husband, if you do not assume the leadership, my father's work will be lost, will not be continued. So it was really the Rebbetzin who inspired the Rebbe to step up and take the position. It is due to her encouragement and love and brilliance that the Rebbe assumed the leadership of his father-in-law. Just letting you know, it's always a great woman behind every Rebbe. I'll tell you a funny story, and then we're going to go into the nitty gritty. That on the anniversary of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, the Neshei Chabad, which means the women in Crown Heights, chipped in and bought a gorgeous bouquet of flowers. Now, and they sent it to the Rebbe's house, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin house on President Street. And on the flowers was a card with about 500 names of people that were very ill or didn't have children or needed a blessing. So when the flowers arrived at the house, the Rebbetzin took the card, said to the Rebbe's secretary who brought the flowers, go bring the list to my husband, to the Rebbe, to his office, so he could work on this, to give a blessing. So when the secretary brought in the card to the Rebbe's office, which was a few blocks away in 770, the Rebbe looked at it, smiled, and he said, I'll say it in Yiddish, the Rebbetzin hat echet gekent geben a bracha. He says, in a sense, why are you bringing it to me? You know that my wife, the Rebbetzin, could equally give a blessing. She's just, in a sense, even holier than me. And he smiled. But so again, the way the Rebbe looked at his Rebbetzin, that says it all. You understand? That she in herself was the caliber of a Rebbe, but in the feminine version. So now the Rebbe. So to explain the Rebbe's influence, you know, look at history. A lot of people had power, but they had no influence. Think of the great leaders, Caesar, right? Caligula, all the great. Paro had a lot of power. They enslaved, they persecuted, they lauded, right? But did they have, after they died, was there any influence left? Everybody said, good riddance for that tyrant, for that Meshuggah. But then look at the world of people who have no power, but they have tremendous influence. Our prophets, the Rebbe. The Rebbe didn't exude power. He didn't lord over people. The Rebbe influenced. No power, but tremendous influence. Our prophets, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Elijah, no power. They were even tortured and killed by their own Jewish people in some cases. But influence. Till this very day, we read the lessons of the prophets and we learn and we are inspired by the prophets in our Torah. And then the Rebbe was the same way. Power? The Rebbe didn't want power. The Rebbe influenced. Thousands and millions of people in the entire world were influenced and continued to be influenced by the Rebbe's teachings and way of life that he taught us. I want to share with you a beautiful story I read. Remember Shirley Chisholm, the Black American Congresswoman in Brooklyn? Remember her? In 1968, she finally was elected as congressman for the district, my family's district, Brooklyn, New York. Now, the US House of Representatives were very, very anti-Blacks, bigoted, racist. So what did they do to punish her? They gave her to be the head of the Department of Agriculture, which was like a slap in the face to her. It's like making me the head of the Department of, I don't know what, soda cans. They did it to stick her. She was furious. And the headline I remember on the newspapers was, does a tree grow in Brooklyn? There's no trees in Brooklyn. How could she be the head of the Department of Agriculture? Now, right before she was, hi, good morning, Diane. Right before she was, she went to get $1 from the Rebbe and said to the Rebbe, can you endorse me? Can you endorse me? And the Rebbe said, I give blessings, I don't give endorsements, you know? So now, after she's appointed the head of the Department of Agriculture, she gets a message from the Rebbe's office. I want to talk to you. So she's reluctant to go, but she goes. The Rebbe said to her, I hear that you were appointed with this very important position, the Department of Agriculture. She says to the Rebbe, I'm furious. It's like a slap in my face. The Rebbe said to her, but let me ask you a question, Miss Shizan, the Rebbe says to her. Aren't there thousands of children who are starving? She says, yeah. So the Rebbe says to her, as the head of the Department of Agriculture, You have to take a crisis and turn it into an opportunity to provide food for the hungry. Okay, the Rebbe tells her that she doesn't know what the Rebbe's talking about. Anyway, she leaves, and she's in Washington, and she's sitting near Congressman Robert Doyle. Remember Robert Doyle of the Midwest? And he's bemoaning the fate of the Midwest farmers. Their surplus. They're dying because everybody's importing and no one is buying from America anymore. What should we do? The words of the Rebbe come back to her, and she and him have a whole conversation. You have surplus and I have starvation. You have food and I have hunger. And together they established the food stamp and WIC programs. Till this day, that feeds millions of hungry Americans. Crisis, the Rebbe said, has to become opportunity. Challenges, there's no challenge here. This is an opportunity. Could you imagine the foresight and the vision that the Rebbe had? Power, no, but influence, absolutely. Showing people how to take every opportunity that comes your way, every challenge, every what she thought was a slap in the face. Till this day, she is documented as the one who started the food stamp and WIC program, Shirley Chisholm, from her encounter with the Rebbe. So this is one story I wanted to open up with about the Rebbe's influence. So I'm going to share a few stories, and I want to break it down into 3 parts. There are three momentous eras in Jewish life. In the 1700s, we had huge emancipation where 1 million Jews assimilated into society. It was the era of freedom. It was the era of emancipation and enlightenment. The second crisis in Jewish life was what we all know, the Holocaust. 6+ million men, women, and children, Jewish communities and life in Europe and all over the world were eradicated, wiped out, entire families. And the third momentous era in Jewish life was when the country, the state of Israel, in 1948 was established. And how did the Rebbe's influence from 1902 to 1994 change the landscape of each of our lives and continues to change the landscape of each of our lives? So I want to share it. I want to share it with you. A second. Just want to get my paper. I have all my stories. I wrote down a bunch of stories. I love stories.
You're a good storyteller.
I very much enjoy reading beautiful stories. So the first was, we discussed the fact that during the time of enlightenment, over 1 million Jews assimilated into culture and gave up basically. It's a new life. In the 1700s, Judaism does not play a role in our lives. And this continues to be part of the American and worldly landscape. So what was the Rebbe's approach? That wherever there is a Jew, no matter how far removed, no matter how distant, I'm going to send a rabbi there. I'm going to send an emissary there. I'm going to set up shop and embrace them, not with rebuke, not with, oh my gosh, you're not doing the right thing, but giving them a place to rediscover who they are. And if you look at some fascinating stories, I'll share with you one, which I thought was just unbelievable. In Portugal, Lisbon, now there's a Chabad rabbi and there's more of a thriving. But years ago, there was nothing in Portugal. The Rebbe found out that there's a tremendous amount of tourists visiting Lisbon. So every month, the Rebbe would send money to a non-kosher fish restaurant to set up a kosher section of fish. So when Jewish tourists would come to Lisbon, they would be able to buy kosher food. Jewish tourists who kept kosher at home. But you know, when you're traveling, it was a huge Yiddish joke, into the vegan Megman. When you're traveling, it's a little more lenient, you know, no one's gonna see, right? So the Rebbe knew that people kept kosher at home, but wouldn't necessarily eat kosher. They're touring. What am I going to get in Portugal? What am I going to get in Lisbon? So the Rebbe paid a non-kosher fish restaurant to have a kosher section. Would you believe it? This is what the Rebbe's approach was. Yes, there are Jews who are living in every part of the world, disconnected maybe from the tradition and from the core Jewish values, but we're going to reach out to them and make it available and accessible with love and goodness. Not like, oh, I caught you not eating kosher. The Rebbe established that. Another beautiful story that illustrates this is in Brazil, there were two huge Jewish day schools. And they both started to struggle. Parents weren't sending kids to Jewish schools. They couldn't sustain it. People were sending to public schools. So they decided, the two boards met, said, let's combine. Let's make one strong Jewish day school. Why should we both have to struggle? Now, one of the day schools had a Chabad principal. So he says to his board, before you do anything, I need to speak to my Rebbe. So he went to New York, wrote to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, absolutely not. The schools shall not be combined. He doesn't ask why. He goes back to the boards. He says, I'm sorry, gentlemen. The Rebbe said no, so it's no. I'm a Lubavitcher. I listen to my Rebbe. And when my Rebbe says I can't do something, so you could combine, but I can't be your principal. So they were like very taken aback. They, you know, their own principal saying no. So they were hesitating, but they were also upset. So this rabbi, this Chabad principal, traveled to New York a few months later and went to see the Rebbe. He says, Rebbe, you know, as a Chabad chassid, I didn't question you. I didn't say, Rebbe, why shouldn't we combine the schools? That you said no is no, but now my board is giving me a very hard time. The Rebbe smiles and says, why didn't you ask me? I would have told you right away why. I'll tell you why. Because he says, you know, Jewish mothers, right? Jewish mothers are helicopter mothers. They are on top of the school. Oh, the teacher didn't say the right thing. You're not teaching well. You're not doing it this way. You could have done it this way. I don't like the way you're educating my child. Their math level isn't high enough. You're not teaching enough science. You're teaching too much science. My child has no gym. My child has too much gym. Jewish mothers. We're all Jewish mothers. So what's the mother going to do? She's going to say to the principal, I'm taking my kid out of school and I'm sending them to public school because there's no other choice. And that means that child will not have a Jewish education. But if there's another Jewish school in Brazil, the mother will say, oh yeah, I'm taking him out of Eitz Chaim and I'm putting him bicultural. I'm leaving your Jewish school, going to the other Jewish school.
So smart. So smart.
The principal. So the principal goes back to Brazil and tells the board this, and they said the Rebbe is right. We're going to keep both schools open, and both schools flourished. Power? No, but influence, brilliance. In every corner of the world, the Rebbe impacted. And you know, last year when we came to Yud Shvat, I shared with you many stories. My father, who was what they called the Rebbe's CIA man, because of his, my father was brilliant, goes without saying, he's my father now, but he was, but also because my father's influence in media as a journalist and a publisher, and top American correspondent for the largest Israeli daily, the Rebbe would give my father these unbelievable tasks that no one else could do. But I want to share with you another beautiful story before we go to the next topic. No, let's go to the next topic, then I'll share the story. So the next area that the Rebbe addressed was the Jews of the Holocaust. A demoralized, demolished people came back from Europe. The last thing they were looking for in America was Judaism. Let's face it, right? What did the Rebbe do? The Rebbe started a campaign of, just like the Nazis hunted down every man, woman, and child who was Jewish, whether you were really Jewish or you had a great-great-grandfather who was Jewish or looked like a Jew. He hunted down and he killed and cremated and destroyed every Jew. He hunted with hate. He ran after us with hate and destruction. The Rebbe said, how do you fight this? How do you fight this? With love. The same way they hated, we have to love. We have to love. So the Rebbe began a campaign of love and compassion. Love with the same ferocity that they hated. Embrace every Jew, no matter who they are and what they are, with love. Very famous story of a fellow writes, an older man in Britain. My brother tells me the story. It's a fascinating story. I just remembered. Listen. So my brother is in the shul in Britain, and he sees an old man sitting in the shul, and every time a little child runs by, he gives him a hug and says, I love you. Now, I don't know in your shul, my shul, but older people in shul, they hate kids. The kids are too noisy, the kids are too loud, the kids are stepping on me, the kids are rowdy, the kids took the sitter, the kids took toys. Older people don't tolerate usually kids, right? It's too, when I moved to Norwalk, we started to have, we had 3 and then we had 4 and then 11. And in the beginning, there were a few crotchety old people who used to say, kids don't belong in shul. They would say to me, Rebbitzin, they don't belong in shul. And I used to laugh, you know, I always laugh. And I said, of course they belong in shul at Max, I said. If you bring them up in shul and it becomes their second home, they're gonna wanna go when they're older. And this is their second home. And the most beautiful sound in a shul is the sound of the laughter and smiles and giggling of children in shul. This is the strength of a shul. And he looked at me and he said, you know what, Rebbitzin, you're right, he said to me. And then I never had any more trouble with my kids running around and being rowdy. Anyway, I had to bring potato chips into the shul. Now that I drew the line. But so this old man, so my brother said to him, you know, what's going on? He kind of said, he says, let me tell you my story. He tells my brother the story. He was the only one in his family that survived the Holocaust, he said. His whole family, brother, sister, parents, grandparents, everyone was wiped out. And he left Germany, came to Britain, and he vowed, I will never, ever get married. I will never, ever have children, he said. I cannot bring children into this vicious, cruel world. And I had a tremendous anger and hate in my heart, he said, because of this. That's what he said. And he was visiting America, and someone said, are you going to go see the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher? You have to go see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He says, okay. And he gets an audience with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asks him, who are you? Tell me. And you know, if you speak to any Holocaust survivor, they'll tell you that they don't allow themselves to cry. Why? Because if they start to cry, they'll never stop crying. They're holding the pain is so great that once they open up the gates of grief, they'll never stop. So he never cried. He comes to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe starts asking him, and he tells him, my whole family was wiped out. I have such a hate of such a grief in my heart. And he bursts out crying. He couldn't help himself. And the Rebbe cried with him, and they cried together, he said. Together they cried. And then the Rebbe says to him, so you don't even have a picture, a remnant, something from any of your family? And he says, no, Rebbe, I don't have anything from my family. But the Rebbe says this now. But love, do you still feel love for your family? He says, Rebbe, every day I feel love for my family that I lost. So the Rebbe said, so you do have something from your family. You have the love that you feel for your family. Now, what are you going to do with that love? It will be lost. You must get married and you must have children and you must give them the gift of love that remained from your family. And more so, the Rebbe said, and whenever you see a child, hug that child and say, I love you. And this way, the love, which is the only remnant of your family, will live on forever and ever. And he went back to Britain and he got married and he had a child. And he tells my brother, but whenever I see a Jewish child, I transfer my love, my gift that I got left from the Holocaust to them. So how did the Rebbe rebuild a broken people? With love. That's how the Rebbe rebuilt the people, with ferocity of love and compassion. And I'll conclude, because it's 11 o'clock, I'll conclude with one more story. My other brother tells me, my other brother told me this was, he went to get $1. You know, Sundays the Rebbe would give out dollars. And in front of him was a little girl, Israeli little girl. And she was ahead of him to get $1. And the Rebbe handed her $1 and said, blessings and success. And she called out, Rebbe, I love you. Rebbe, she's a little girl, 8 years old, 9 years old. And the secretaries of the Rebbe don't take kindly to anyone. You know, they surround the Rebbe and they're like very protective. So they were like, almost like, what's going on here? She's and the Rebbe broke out into the most, my brother said, a smile from ear to ear. And the Rebbe took out another $1 and handed it to her and said, and this $1 is for the love.
Love it.
The love. So if anything you could take out from the Rebbe, anything, any message, is it's not about power, it's about influence. Influence, love, compassion, understanding, non-judgmentalness. It's not always about the discipline and the structure. You'd say, you know, the Jews are so structured, there's rules for everything. It's about even more, is what I always tell my children. It's the fifth code. There's 4 books of the Code of Jewish Law, but there's a 5th one I told them. It's called Menschlichkeit. It's called common sense. It's called love. It's called compassion. It's called acceptance. Yeah, it doesn't tell you that. There's the 4 books. You have all the rules, but there's the 5th book. Sometimes I tell my kids, but what I say in Yiddish, it's the 5th Shulchan Aruch I say, which is the Shulchan Aruch of common sense and compassion and love and understanding. So this Yud Shvat, of course, in our shul, we're going to have a master Kiddush. And of course, my husband, my very brilliant husband will share about the Rebbe. But for us, is on Friday, when you light Shabbos candles, you know, give a little tzedakah. And I'm going to take this to myself, so I'm not preaching, I'm just saying what I'm going to do. I want to look to myself and see, how could I take some of the teachings of the Rebbe and implement them in my life? More, even more. Whether it's reaching out to someone in love, or it's doing something extra in Torah and mitzvah, something that if I met up with the Rebbe, I would be able to say, you know, Rebbe, I did something good this week. You know, accountability. So, Bayal Parai, God is with us wherever we go in all of our challenges. We have to take crisis, turn it into opportunity, as the Rebbe told Shirley Chisholm. And to me, most important was the Rebbe's understanding of the human condition. It is love, it is compassion, it is acceptance. And understanding a person is really what creates the greatest change. It's being able to look at a Jew, seeing their soul, and realizing who they truly are, a part of God. That you see every Jew and you see in them their potential and their godly image. And that really is the key. To look at a person and be able to look at who they truly are, it's a gift. And that's what the Rebbe was able to do. And I think that's something I want to always do. I always want to look at a person and say, wow, look who they truly are. A gift, a godly soul. And how could I do something for them? Because if you do something for someone else, you do something for yourself.
Can I ask you a quick question, Freida?
Yes.
Might not be so quick, but so this whole thing that happened at the Capitol with all these anti-Semitic people who, you know, had T-shirts on and were spewing all this hate